Life teaches you that not everything can be anticipated, and occasionally moments will take you completely by surprise. These instances have the power to alter everything. That evening was one of those instances. Eddie had left for a 3-day training trip abroad. I was accustomed to being alone at home, but for some reason, this night felt different. I sat in the living room drinking wine with soft music playing in the background. The flickering candlelight surrounded me, offering some comfort in the stillness. I wore a simple nightgown, something cozy, hoping to relax and embrace the quiet, searching for some warmth in my solitude. Since Charlie passed away 8 years ago, nights like this had become my way of dealing with the loneliness that had gradually become part of my life. But that night, just as I thought I'd be left alone with my thoughts, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I saw Felipe standing there. I froze for a moment, trying to process why he was at my door. He stood there with Eddie's files in his computer bag, wearing a dark jacket that perfectly fit his broad shoulders. His slightly messy hair added to that effortless charm he always seemed to carry. Felipe had been Eddie's close friend for years, but seeing him at my doorstep like this took me completely by surprise. "Felipe, what are you doing here at this time?" I asked, unable to hide the surprise in my voice. He gave me a polite smile. "Hi, Amy. Eddie and I were working on a project together. I finished my part and didn't want to keep this any longer, so I thought I'd drop it off." I hesitated for a moment. "Oh, right, of course. Well, come in, please. It's late, and I don't want you standing outside." I stepped aside to let him in. As I closed the door behind him, I became acutely aware of how I must have looked, standing in the soft glow of candlelight in my nightgown. I tried to ignore the thought, but I noticed Felipe's eyes linger on me for just a moment before he looked away. Once we entered the living room, Felipe looked around, taking in the candles, the wine, and then gave a slight smile. "Looks like I'm interrupting a cozy evening, huh?" "Not at all," I replied quickly, setting my wine glass on the table. "It's just a quiet night. Nights like these helped me since Charlie passed. But honestly, I'm glad you came by. I haven't had much of a chance to really get to know you." Felipe nodded, his smile softening. "Yeah, we haven't spent much time together, have we? Even though I've been around Eddie for years, I've always wanted to tell you how much I admire you. What you've done for Eddie. How you've always been there for him. It's incredible." I motioned for him to sit, and as he settled onto the couch, I went to grab another wine glass from the kitchen. When I handed it to him and poured the wine, his calm and steady presence filled the room. There was something about Felipe, his quiet confidence and the way he carried himself, that made it hard not to notice his presence. As we sipped our wine and talked lightly, the atmosphere began to shift. There was something unspoken in the air, something palpable. Felipe's gaze lingered on me just a bit too long, and I could feel my cheeks warm under his attention. It was as if he wanted to say something but couldn't quite get the words out, and I was starting to feel things I hadn't felt in a long time. His attention, the warmth in his eyes. It stirred something inside me, a reminder of the connection I had been missing. "Amy?" he said softly, his voice steady yet gentle. "Seeing you like this, alone, it doesn't sit right with me. You're such a strong, remarkable woman, but at the same time, I can feel your loneliness. It doesn't seem fair." His words hit me hard, and I wasn't sure how to respond. I just stared at him, my breath catching in my throat as the room seemed to close in around us. That moment completely took me by surprise. I didn't know what to say, but the sincerity in his eyes kept me frozen in place. I could only smile, though my heart was racing. "Felipe, I understand what you're trying to say," I managed to say, my voice soft but steady. "But this is my choice. Sometimes loneliness feels like a form of protection." Felipe tilted his head slightly, his eyes thoughtful. "Maybe loneliness isn't always the best form of protection," he said quietly. The air between us was thick with something I couldn't quite describe. There was a warmth, a pull in Felipe's gaze, and I knew it wasn't just in my mind. But should we stay in that moment? The intensity of it both scared and excited me. This wasn't the end of the story. That night, I couldn't shake the warmth in Felipe's eyes. Talking to someone so genuine left an impact I couldn't explain, but his words about loneliness stayed with me. How could someone like him, a strong, successful man, feel alone? At one point, I couldn't hold back. I leaned forward slightly and asked him, Felipe, why are you alone? I mean, you're 37, tall, charismatic, successful in your career, smart, mature. What woman could possibly say no to you? As the words left my mouth, I found myself locking eyes with him, waiting for his response. Felipe's expression grew serious for a moment, but the faintest smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He paused, as if carefully choosing his words. Amy, sometimes loneliness feels like a choice, but really it's about not finding the right person. He said thoughtfully. Maybe a man like me has been too picky, or maybe the right person has always been right in front of me, but I just couldn't see it. His words both startled and shook me. I understood what he was implying, but I was too scared to admit it to myself. I felt my face flush slightly, but I managed a small smile. I don't know, Felipe, I said. I think any woman who knows you would be crazy to let you go. A man like you shouldn't be alone. Felipe gazed deeply into my eyes for what felt like an eternity. Then he asked, And you, Amy? Why are you alone? I have to ask. You've been on your own for years. How easy has it been to choose that? His question caught me completely off guard. I hesitated before replying. I'm 60, and I've seen loneliness as a kind of safe harbor. I said, my voice faltering. After Charlie, I just couldn't imagine getting that close to someone again. My words trailed off as I unintentionally met his gaze. There was warmth there, a pull that I couldn't ignore. The tension between us was almost palpable. That's how I ended the night with Felipe, full of unanswered questions. As I lay in bed, the weight of what had happened between us pressed on me. There was guilt, yes, but also an undeniable excitement. These were emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I have to admit, everything changed after that conversation with Felipe. Days passed, but my mind kept replaying that night. His words, his gaze. They stayed with me like they had been etched into my soul. No matter how hard I tried to push those feelings down, every time I spoke to him, they only grew stronger. During the days Eddie was busy with work, I continued to talk to Felipe. We grabbed coffee sometimes. Other times we sat in his car, talking for hours. It felt natural, effortless, as if building a connection with him required no effort at all. But with every meeting, something deep inside me grew stronger. This wasn't just friendship. Every time I heard Felipe's voice, every time I saw that familiar smile, my heart raced. I couldn't deny it anymore. These feelings weren't just innocent friendship. The hardest part was keeping it a secret from Eddie. Building such a connection with my son's best friend? Was it wrong? Or was life giving me a second chance? Our last meeting was vivid in my mind. We were sitting side by side in his car, sipping coffee and talking. That day, we grew closer than ever before. So close that Felipe's gaze lingered on my lips. My breath caught, and my heart pounded. The space between us was almost non-existent, but we both pulled back, and the magic of that moment lingered before we went our separate ways. After that night, I didn't hear from Felipe again. When his message finally came, it was more profound than I expected. It was just an address and a few words, but they carried so much meaning. Amy, meet me at this address tonight at 8. I'll be waiting for you. There's a place I want to show you, something I want to share only with you. Reading those words made something stir inside me. My hands trembled, and my heart raced so fast it was hard to breathe. Each word he wrote felt certain, like a turning point in our lives. The spark inside me was both terrifying and thrilling. I knew exactly what he meant. This wasn't going to be an ordinary meeting. Should I go? I asked myself. But deep down, I already knew the answer. Preparing for that evening felt like transforming into someone else. I wore a sleek black dress, form-fitting and bold with an off-the-shoulder design that stopped just above my knees. It was both graceful and daring. When I looked in the mirror, I realized it had been a long time since I felt this attractive. My hair fell in loose waves over my shoulders, and I wore light makeup with bold red lipstick. I was sure Felipe's eyes wouldn't leave me all night. I'm doing this for him, I whispered to myself, trying to calm the excitement bubbling inside me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just for him. It was for me, too. I wanted to feel desirable, passionate, and special again. When I arrived at the address, Felipe was waiting in his car. The moment our eyes met, something stirred inside me. He was sitting there, sleeves slightly rolled up, one hand resting on the steering wheel. His eyes held that same warmth and determination. He stepped out of the car and walked over, opening the door for me. "Come on, Amy," he said softly, extending his hand. "There's something special I want to share with you tonight." As I took his hand, I realized my fingers were trembling, but his reassuring touch calmed me. I got into the car, and we drove off into the night. It was just the two of us. About half an hour later, Felipe stopped the car. "We're here," he said, his eyes sparking with excitement. In front of me was a breathtaking view. Nestled between the mountains stood a small house, its lights glowing warmly. The cool night air brushed my face as Felipe gently guided me toward the house. When Felipe opened the door, I was speechless. The house was nothing short of a masterpiece. Every detail was flawless. High ceilings, moonlight pouring through large windows, warm wooden features, and a glowing fireplace. It all felt as though the place had been crafted just for me. The walls were decorated with art in natural tones, and a sleek glass coffee table sat gracefully in the center, surrounded by elegant furniture. A chic dining table was perfectly positioned in the room, and every element seemed to have been placed with such thought and intention. "Did you design this?" I asked, my voice filled with awe. Felipe smiled warmly. "Yes, but it wasn't until now that I had someone as special as you to show it to," he replied. In that instant, I found myself lost for words. Everywhere I looked, the space seemed to match my tastes perfectly. I was able to forget the inner turmoil I had carried for so long, allowing myself to be swept away by the magic of the moment. Felipe gestured toward the couch in the living room, inviting me to sit. The crackling of the fire filled the air, and the atmosphere felt like something straight out of a fairy tale. He returned with 2 glasses and a bottle of red wine. As he poured the wine, he leaned in slightly. "Amy," he began, his voice deep and resolute, "I asked you to come here because I know I can't keep holding back how I feel." I looked into his eyes, speechless, but he stopped me before I could speak. "Let me say this. This house, this place, this night. It's all because I wanted to share it with you. You've captivated me more than anything else." My heart raced so fast that I could barely breathe. Felipe's words broke down every wall I had built around myself. "You know, Amy," he continued, taking a sip of wine, "seeing you alone, feeling your solitude, it pulled me closer to you every day. And now I know I can't keep running from it." In that moment, the tension between us reached its peak. Felipe's eyes revealed everything. There was no hiding it anymore. As he leaned in closer, our lips were almost touching. I forgot to breathe. This was the moment I had been waiting for, but just before our lips met, I pulled back slightly. "Felipe," I whispered, "before we do this, we need to be sure." My voice was trembling. Felipe was unwavering. "I'm sure, Amy. I'm absolutely sure." I didn't know how the night would end, but one thing was clear. It was about to become one of the most memorable moments of my life. When Felipe's lips finally met mine, everything changed in an instant. It was like a firework ignited deep within me, a passion that had been dormant for years, bursting to life. His kiss was deep and intense, and in that moment, I wanted nothing more than to be in his arms. My hands found their way around his neck as he pulled me closer, his grip on my waist firm and full of desire. It was a moment so powerful, so full of passion that nothing else mattered. "Amy," he whispered, his lips trailing down my neck. "You're so beautiful. How did I not realize how incredibly captivating you are?" His voice was deep, filled with both passion and tenderness, and his words only made the emotions already swirling within me stronger. I leaned into his ear, my breath shaky, my heart racing. "Felipe, you're so handsome, and thank you. Thank you for making me feel this way," I said, my words trembling with raw honesty. I had completely surrendered to the excitement and intensity of the moment. The wine glass tipped over, spilling its crimson contents across the table, but neither of us cared. In that moment, the world had stopped. It was just us. The wine was nothing compared to the passion flowing between us. As Felipe's hand slid my dress off my shoulders, I felt the heat of his touch on my skin. My dress slowly fell to the floor, leaving me completely exposed in front of him. I reached for his shirt, my fingers trembling as I unbuttoned it one by one. When I finally removed it and tossed it aside, I couldn't help but marvel at his broad shoulders and toned chest. "You're incredible," I whispered, my eyes locked onto his. His smile, warm and captivating, disarmed me completely. By the time we reached the bedroom, nothing could stop us. As I lay back on the bed, my bare body exposed, Felipe leaned over me. His eyes watched me carefully, filled with a mixture of passion and admiration. His fingers brushed softly across my cheek before his lips found mine again. His kisses were intense, full of passion, but also unbelievably tender. As he leaned down closer to me, I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him toward me. Every touch, every movement only pulled me deeper into him. "Amy," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "Being with you. I can't put it into words, but I know I'll remember this moment forever." Everything happened so quickly. I could feel Felipe's warmth radiating through my body, and something immense built up inside me. I let out a sound louder than I expected, gripping the sheets tightly with my hands. Felipe had stopped giving compliments and was fully focused on his movements. We were both out of breath, and I couldn't even count how many times I had trembled or tensed. It had been so long since I'd felt anything this intense, this overwhelming. I didn't even remember how many times I had dug my nails into his back. Knowing we were in the mountain cabin, far from anyone's ears, I started to make more noise, not holding back. I told Felipe, "I want to feel all the warmth I'm experiencing inside of me." With his face flushed and breathless, he nodded and finally allowed himself to let go. What I had just experienced left me so exhausted that I could barely move, but everything had been perfect. Felipe lay next to me, gently wrapping his arm around my shoulder as we both tried to catch our breath. We stared at the ceiling, the silence between us speaking volumes about everything we were feeling. He took a deep breath and turned to face me. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice soft but full of concern. "What will we tell Eddie? Is this going to be our secret forever?" I turned my gaze to him, and the expression on his face was filled with a mix of fear and a glimmer of hope. Slowly, I ran my fingers across his face and smiled faintly. "Felipe," I said quietly, my voice filled with determination. "Tonight, just for tonight, I don't want to think about what comes next. I want to be here with you." I reached for my phone and sent a message to Eddie. "I'm staying at a friend's place tonight. Don't worry about me." As I hit send, a wave of calm and excitement washed over me. That night, we lost ourselves in the reality of everything we had shared. But the next morning would bring uncertainties and questions that would need answering. I knew the story wasn't over. It couldn't be. For now, though, we left the questions of the future in silence. Stay tuned, because this story doesn't end here. It's only the beginning. If you've made it this far, I know this story has touched you deeply. There's so much more to share, and you won't want to miss any of it. Don't forget to hit the follow button, turn on notifications, and leave a comment about this story.